infantry. If the nomads come to resist, so he advocates in a particular month, they're going to, in the early summer, they're going to move north to take on the nomad threat. And if the nomads come to resist when we move north, we meet them in decisive battle. If they don't come, we disperse to construct long walls. So there's the plan. Either we take them on in a direct battle, or else if they're not there, if they're not willing to join us in battle, then we disperse the troops and begin this process of wall construction all over again. Since the distance between the 6 garrisons is less than 1,000 li, and since the labor of one man for a month is sufficient to construct 3 paces of wall, so try to imagine that three strides long of wall can be built by one person in 1 month, according to this memorial. 300 men will complete 3 li, 3,000 men will complete 30 li, 30,000 men will complete 300 li. So that's about 100 miles, right? So averaging the difficulties over the span of 1,000 li with a total force of, there's an error on my part there, the original text is 100,000 men. If you do the math, that's what it should be. In 1 month, it will certainly be completed. So he has a vision of 100,000 men, the 60,000 troops, and the non-fighting wall builders who are going to construct the wall he needs in the space of 1 month. The grain supply for a month would not be excessive, so he thinks we can do it. We've got the grain reserves and the infrastructure to supply this expeditionary force and wall building force for a period of a month when they're going to do the building. The grain supply for a month would not be excessive. Thinking of the eternal benefit, they would labor without complaint, right? So very, very optimistic. Given all the previous warnings that we've had from Sima Qian and from others about the downside of construction, the human cost of building these walls. Here's a memorial from a prime minister who seems untroubled by this. This particular expedition never happened. The memorial was given, but as I've said, they moved south to Luoyang and adopted a different strategy towards the steppe that didn't involve the constructing of walls. But their immediate successors, did. Again, in the galleries upstairs, there are many examples of other Buddhist monuments from the successor states to the Northern Way, the Northern Qi in particular. That's what fills our gallery upstairs. And they were great wall builders. They did fulfill the goals of Gao Liu and of his memorial to his monarch. And so did the Sui dynasty, who united China for a very brief period of time before the Tang dynasty. They were also builders of walls. The overwhelming Tang dynasty voice from literary sources is, again, swinging back to the negative voice, the pessimistic, don't build walls, whatever you do, kind of voice. And here's one example which I hurriedly translated, so not a literary translation by any means, but I hurriedly translated, not being able to find a ready-made English one in time for the talk, but so it won't be beautiful, but it will, I hope, be accurate. But this is Wang Han writing in the early 8th century, so during the Tang dynasty. 300 years after the memorial by Gao Liu, his lines on watering his horse at the wall. So he's returning from an expedition against the pastoral nomads of the northwest. And he's coming back and he encounters the remains of the wall that have always marked the landscape of the northern border. So returning, I water my horse at a hole at the long wall. Beside the road are many white bones. Asking an ancient local from what dynasty they came, he tells that they were the Qin king's troops who built the wall. At dusk, the north side of the frontier is devoid of men. The wails of ghosts roil the heavens. Innocent of any crime, they were punished and unrewarded for their labor. Their lonely souls wander at the wall's side. What a fool, the king of Qin, to build the wall. It was heaven that defeated Qin, not the barbarians. Remember that? It's exactly the same idea in very, very different wording that we had previously, right? In the end, it wasn't, in Lu Xun's comments on the wall, it didn't keep out the Hun, it was an internal collapse that was responsible for the fall of the Qin. So it was heaven that defeated Qin, and by heaven he means fate. He means the natural playing out of the consequences of enslaving people to build these walls. So it was heaven that defeated Qin, not the barbarians. For once calamity arose inside that desolate wall, Xianyang, that's the Qin capital, on the Wei River was never again the capital, right? So again, a very pessimistic, poetic but pessimistic description of the shortcomings of wall building. We can't not have a session on the Great Wall without talking about this woman, Meng Jiangyu, an interesting figure from Chinese folklore. Is that name familiar to anybody? It features in every popular account of the Great Wall, Chinese or English, and so we can't not tell her story. It's an example of a meme, of a replicating idea that, like all good memes, is not only a very good replicator, but also one that evolves over time. So the first versions of her account occur from some of the very earliest literary texts from the Chinese tradition. And the meme is originally a meme about the importance of ritual observance, of courteous ritual behavior between members of the elite. The story goes that the king of Qi, now remember that's the last of the states that's defeated by the state of Qin, has been fighting a war against one of his neighbors. And the husband of this woman, Qi Liang, dies in battle. And on his way home from the war, the king of Qi encounters the widow on the road and offers to her his condolences for the loss of her husband, to which she replies, if you want to do this properly, if you want to offer me true, ritually appropriate condolences, you come and see me at home. And duly the king of Qi does that. That meant that story has no walls in it, and it has no king of Qin in it. But that's the source from which this tale evolves and eventually becomes very, very closely tied. Becomes the most famous Great Wall associated story. A later version of this tale has exactly the same woman and exactly the same king of Qi. And after she's had her due respects paid by the king of Qi for the loss of her husband, she then goes to find the body of her husband at the city wall where he dies, and she finds his corpse outside the ramparts, outside the Cheng, not a Changcheng, not a long wall, but a city wall, where his dead body's lying. And she weeps for him. And the Han Dynasty period, the Han period account says that no passerby could fail to wipe away a tear at the sight of this woman weeping for her dead husband outside the city wall. At which point, the wall too is moved and collapses. The city wall is moved and collapses. And this one image then begins to become associated with great wall building. And instead of him being a victim of conflict away from, without a Great Wall context, this story then becomes associated with the Great Wall specifically. Instead of, he then becomes one of the convicts who's responsible for building the wall, who's sent by the king of Qin, this cruel, stupid, foolish king of Qin who expends human effort on this folly to keep out the barbarian nomads. And she travels to the Great Wall and weeps, and the wall collapses and gives up the body of this convict who's been buried within it. So she becomes a figure of cult in this particular case. She's like one of many female figures that have places in Chinese popular religion. This is a temple that survives at the very eastern end of the Great Wall today that has a depiction of her, a rather modern-looking image, although the building is old, of Meng Jiangnu, the woman who goes to the wall and cries and has the wall, in sympathy, liberate her husband's bones. It was such a popular tale that, does anyone recognize this photograph? It's again a very, very wonderful photograph of Paul Pulliot in the caves at Dunhuang, retrieving his cache of manuscripts. As you probably know, Dunhuang was one of the last stop if you're leaving China on the Silk Road, or rather the first stop if you're leaving China, the last stop if you're coming into China on the Silk Road. And a cave at this site was found in the early 20th century, walled up and containing an abundance of manuscripts. And there's Paul Pulliot in there, the French explorer, taking, I'm afraid, the cream of the Chinese manuscripts that were found there away back to Paris, where they are now. He was then followed by other people who also removed a great deal of material. But he found within there two versions of this legend of Meng Jiangnu. So it was a sufficiently popular Tang Dynasty account that it occurs in even relatively modest copies, like the ones you can see here, done at Dunhuang. Quite a nice illustration on the back of wall building. I mean, we're not going to read the text, but there we go. We've got a very hastily done sketch of wall building on the frontier to illustrate the story of Meng Jiangnu. And then the second version, also from Pulliot's collection in Paris. The Ming are the ones who are responsible for those iconic buildings north of Beijing. And they're also the first to leave to us maps that they themselves made of what they were up to. This is a 17th century book describing the region within the order, within the Great River, the Yellow River bend. If I can get a, it doesn't seem to work on every slide, but in the center there you can see the town that was founded as a bastion south of the wall to demark the Ming dynasty's northern border and to keep out the nomads. As you can see, the river runs across the very northern edge of this particular image here. And every single one of those marked points south of the wall is a fortified town. It was an intensely militarized region of China during this period, and beginning in the 16th century and then going through into the 17th. Having trouble advancing. I got a freeze, I'm afraid. I do apologize. There we go, that worked. Just so you can see it a little bit more clearly, though, there's a black and white version of the same tool, the very intensively fortified regions within the Great River Loop that we've been discussing previously under the Qin dynasty. That's the location, right in the middle of the order. So that's where the Ming were building their major fortifications, the town of Yulin. And it's also at that same period when the Ming are doing their most intensive wall building that Europeans begin to get their first visions of the Great Wall, of the one of Ming construction, of Ming dynasty construction. This is one of the earliest maps to illustrate, to have the Great Wall explicitly marked on a map of China. So this is from 1584, the heyday of Ming wall building in the 16th century. North on this particular one is to the right-hand side of your screen. And it's difficult to see on this particular image, but there's a very clearly marked crenellated fortification running right the way along that side of the yellow region, which is China. John Speed was an English map maker who cobbled together all sorts of both earlier maps and also bits of anecdotes about what was found in the regions that they described. And he also has a very clear depiction of the Great Wall. This is an interesting map for several reasons. So by this time, remember that for the medieval period, for what in Europe is the medieval period, access to China had been overland. So if you wanted to reach China from Europe, you went via the north and approached China overland from the north. Beginning with the Portuguese outpost in Macau, on the south of China, navigation by sea gradually became the default path to China during the 16th and then 17th centuries. And this leads to a confusion. If you visited the same place from two different directions, potential observations of the same feature can end up getting duplicated. You've seen it from the north, you've seen it from the south, and you end up thinking they're two different things. And in fact, that's what happened to Peking. This map has two Pekings on it, two Beijings on it. One, let's see if I can get a closer view of the slide. There we go. So towards the top of the slide here, you can see the word Kambalu, underneath Kathea, which is the old name for China, for Mongol China. Kambalu was the Mongol capital of China. Further south, you can see, I don't know how clearly, but in between Qin and what should probably be pronounced Xi, underneath Qinxi, you can see a separate Peking, appropriately labeled as Pakin, right? So Beijing or Peking. There are two Pekings on this map. One, the old one that was known from the northern approach, and one that was known from the southerly approach, and that was the Ming name for the capital. So we've got two of those. A few other things that we can't not mention on this map. How about that for a bit of lore that gets incorporated into one of the peripheral regions, the Tangut, who are one of the nomadic peoples of the steppe, who themselves founded a dynasty for a period several centuries prior to the Ming. Out of this kingdom, men will have all rhubarb be brought onto them out of Europe. Nothing mentioned about this location on the map other than the fact that it's a source of European rhubarb. One other shot. And there we go, finally the wall. So there's our earliest English map showing the Great Wall, a wall of 400 leagues